Welcome everyone. My name is Stefaan Verhulst. I'm the co-founder of the GovLab, also a co-founder of the Data Tank, and I'm also a professor at the Engineering School of New York University, and I will be your host today at the fourth annual State of Open Data Policy Summit, which will focus on what's the current state of open data and how do we envision a future where open data remains an important feature of the data ecosystem as well. Next slide. As mentioned, I'm the founder and co-founder of the GovLab, but I'm also the lead of one of our projects at the GovLab, which is the Open Data Policy Lab, which is the organizer of today's summit. And the Open Data Policy Lab is an initiative at the GovLab where we specifically focus on how do we advance open data, by which we mean access to data for reuse in the public interest. And we do this by analysis. So we have a research function. We also have a guidance function where we develop roadmaps, blueprints on how you can advance access to data for reuse in the public interest. But we also have a community. We actually do training. We develop data stewards boot camps where we train the next generation of data stewards that can make data accessible and available. And we also organize events. And today's event is one of our signatory events that we have annually, because we felt that in order to keep the momentum going with regard to open data, we do need to check in every year. Where are we? How are we doing? And where do we go next? And so that's what the focus is of today as well. Now, next slide, please. At the GovLab, we work with partners worldwide, and this is just a few of the logos of the partners of the partners that we worked with in the recent past. And as you can see, our efforts scope regions, scope sectors, and also are obviously involving a whole range of both academic but also nonprofit actors as well. Next slide. Now, in order to kickstart today, let me make kind of three observations. The first observation that at the Open Data Policy Lab, we've been monitoring open data for the last few years. And what we have noticed that for the last few years, we're actually entering in a variety of waves, and what we have called today the fourth wave of open data, by which we mean that the initial efforts for open data were focused on freedom of information. The second wave was then specifically around opening government data, where we also saw a whole wave of open government platforms being made available. The third wave is where the private sector also started making its data available through data collaboratives, together with the public sector and together with nonprofit actors. And from our point of view, with the arrival of Gen AI, we are actually entering the fourth wave. Now, important to say is that because we are in the fourth wave, it does not mean that the other waves are not important. And from our point of view, the other waves are actually fundamental in order to make sure that we are benefiting from the fourth wave and benefiting from actually the use of Gen AI for open data as well. Next slide. Now, if we are looking into the fourth wave, we see that on the one hand, open data becomes crucial for AI, both in terms of pre-training and in terms of fine-tuning, but specifically for using open data for augmenting RAG models and for having public interest applications. Now, the good news is that not only data is important for AI, but AI can also play an increasingly important role for democratizing access to data as well. And so we see that AI can be used to provide a more conversational interface with open data, that it makes it easier for people to actually engage with data. We see also that AI is becoming more and more used for improving data quality, or at least assessing and helping data preparation. And AI is also being used for data discovery. And so we are at this kind of unique moment where AI can, if we are designing it well, and if we are building the capacity worldwide, AI can be a force for good with regard to open data, and open data can be a force for good for actually making sure that AI is qualitative, equitable, and also provides on its promise as well. Next slide. Now, while we see positive developments in the open data space, we also get worried because we may enter what we have called a data winter. While we have an AI summer, we actually see a rapid decline in accessibility and availability of data. And that's both at the private sector, where we've seen that social media typically provided access through applications to their data that has now been closed or has become much harder to obtain. Open science data is also much harder to obtain. And of course, we've also seen that many countries are scaling back vis-a-vis their open data commitments as well. And so while we are what we can say the best of times, we might also enter the worst of times, where we actually see a rapid decline in what typically was kind of an understanding of the data, accessibility of the data ecosystem as well. Next slide. And then the last trend, which I will highlight just to kick us off, because we have a speaker that will do the overall framing, is that we also see more recently new kinds of data policies emerging. On the one hand, we see, for instance, within the UK, where they just, of course, adopted a new law, which was the Data Use and Access Act. It's kind of an example of the new generation of data policies where access to open data and access to private sector data is becoming reinvigorated, and where they're also starting to reimagine whether the data governance framework that typically has guided the data space are actually still relevant for today's age. On the other hand, we also see many nations developing data platforms, national data libraries, national data platforms. And quite often this is a result of a concern about data sovereignty, which is the other big topic that we are seeing in the data space, where as a result of concerns about data sovereignty, when nations are actually starting to develop their own data libraries and shield access to that for a variety of reasons. Now, in addition to what's happening at the national level, of course, we also see the Global Digital Compact that tries to coordinate those policies and be also a steering function across nations vis-a-vis a kind of envisioned future of what data could and should look like in order to make sure that everyone benefits from the data. But I'm not going to say more about the Global Digital Compact because, of course, we have the person who was driving it in a second. Next slide. So what we hope to do today is to really reflect on some of those trends. And this was just a stage setter that hopefully gives the audience an understanding that the open data ecosystem is very dynamic and that we are exactly in a different environment than 10 years ago, for instance. But what we hope to do is to have an opening note that really sets the frame on what's the current opportunity and the current challenge. Then we will have a public sector panel that will reflect on open data within the public sector and also the needs of the public sector vis-a-vis open data and AI. And then we will have a private and civil society sector that will also consider their role within the current data ecosystem. And then I will hopefully within kind of a 2-hour period here provide some closing remarks in order to set the stage for what's next and what we may want to do together moving forward as well. So with that, that's enough for me. Next slide, please. Let's introduce the first opening note, and we are super delighted to have Amandeep Singh Gill being able in his busy schedule to join us and to really give us kind of the framing with regard to where data fits within the current landscape, and more importantly, what's the role of open data as we are entering a new era of AI, a new era of digital transformation as well. Over to you, Amandeep.
Thank you so much, Stefaan, and thank you for setting the stage so beautifully. This topic that we are addressing today is very close to my heart, and it is a key aspect of the Global Digital Compact that you mentioned in one of your last slides. So if we go back to the Summit of the Future last year, 193 member states coming together to adopt the Global Digital Compact with its 5 key objectives. addressing the digital divide and accelerating progress on the SDGs, the aspect of trust, safety, and protection online, human rights online, the inclusive digital economy, in a sense, the centerpiece of the Global Digital Compact, and then these two areas that are emerging policy priorities, data governance and artificial intelligence. So data is one of the 5 pillars of the GDC, and there was a specific decision to start first global discussion, multi-stakeholder discussion within the United Nations on data. So a working group on data governance has been established. Its terms of reference have been finalized. And it is on its way to some outcomes, which will be presented alongside a review of the Global Digital Compact in a couple of years. In its work, in its terms of reference, of course, it's going to focus on principles. It's going to focus on interoperability issues, but some of the issues that we are focusing on today, access, openness, data commons, data for development, are also on the agenda for the first time. Now, some interesting aspect that you highlighted in your keynote around this 4th wave, artificial intelligence, they are also on the agenda of the United Nations. And I'm delighted to see Ambassador Phil Thigo in this session, because he and his colleagues in the high-level advisory body on AI that presented its report last year in September, just ahead of the conclusion of the negotiations on the GDC. Among its 7 recommendations, there's one recommendation that speaks directly to this data question, this 4th wave. So this is in the context of the HLab's work on what it called common benefits, so common understanding, common ground. And by the way, just a week back, the General Assembly decided the modalities of the International Independent Scientific Panel on AI to build that common understanding, come out with regular assessments of the state of play, the opportunities and the risks. And then it also decided on its twin sister, a global policy dialogue on AI governance within the United Nations on a regular basis, so to create that common ground for action. Now, this area of common benefits, data plays a critical role there. Humanity is generating more and more data. And in a sense, people have been saying data is the new oil, but that kind of implies a sense of competition, holding on to data and selling it or using it in a selfish way. Data is rather the new soil. It is the soil for inclusive innovation, soil for the growth of the digital economy. So how can we incentivize this mindset shift from oil to soil? And how can we incentivize access and sharing of open data in the public interest, as you highlighted at the outset? So in the context of this 4th wave, what the HLab said was that we need to foster a global AI data framework to standardize not only data-related definitions, principles, and stewardship, but also to ensure transparency and accountability in AI systems. And data governance plays a key role in AI governance. The two are inseparable. In fact, this is one of the guiding principles that the HLab highlighted. So what it suggested for this global AI data framework was that you have not only data-related definitions and principles for the global governance of AI training data, but also common standards around AI training data provenance, and then market-shaping data stewardship and exchange mechanisms. So this aspect of shaping the future data marketplace so that we have more public interest AI, so that we have more democratic innovation and participation in the digital economy is going to be critical, even though there's no specific mechanism, global mechanism that is looking at it. And in fact, that's an opportunity for multi-stakeholder collaboration and for initiatives such as the one that's bringing us together today. Now, I want to conclude by just mentioning a few essentials. I think When we speak of openness, there is often some fuzziness, some um, uncertainty about this. So we need to be more clear about openness, for whom, by whom, and how, the difference between openness and open-ended data, and how do we kind of, work through the cycle of data with this openness paradigm as a guiding principle, from collection to curation and processing, usage, which creates more data, and rinse and repeat. We go through this cycle. So how do we ensure that the data value chain is not skewed in one direction or the other? And how do we ensure this literacy around what's the value inside of data, not with a view to incentivizing hoarding of data, but just with a view to ensuring equity across the data value chain? So understanding the usefulness of data. And then, we need kind of more common understandings across the global space. So this work on definitions, standards, benchmarking, evaluations. And then finally, we need some incentive structures for data to flow, data to be accessible, data to, as was mentioned in Stefan's slides, move into this direction of data commons. Data commons are critical for the UN's future work across the 17 sustainable development goals. And I don't know if they can be called cooperators, but there is a lot of collaborative work that would be needed for data commons. It's a little bit like what the open source community has done in GitHub and other places with these code repositories. So we need to incentivize this kind of work, and we need to have the neutral facilitators for this work. Whether they are UN system bodies, or they are, think tanks and academia, or coalitions of governments that allow people to see this as a collaborative effort, which is not, distorting the incentives or taking away the public interest dimension. So with those thoughts, I wish you the very best for the rest of the discussions. And again, applaud Stefaan, your leadership in bringing us together. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Amandeep. And this is kind of the perfect setting to today's session. I always like that talks end with questions and not only with statements. And I think the questions you have framed, Amandeep, both in terms of what do we mean by openness, how do we really understand the value, and how do we establish the value, and how do we do it in ways that there is shared benefit. I think these are some of the questions that we definitely will touch upon throughout today's sessions. So thanks again, Amandeep, for your leadership, and also thanks for the being present today, given your busy schedule as well. So thanks so much. So let's move to the first panel. Now that we have kind of a really good framing and stage setting of where we are as it relates to open data, but also from a global perspective, what is needed in order to make sure that data benefits everyone and that no one is left behind. Let me start with the first panel of today's summit, which is the public sector panel. And we have four amazing panelists. Unfortunately, just before today's session, we heard that one of the panelists is not going to be able to make it, which is Claire Melamed. But that also means, of course, that we may have a little bit more time among the three other remaining panels, which are amazing in their own rights. And so let me briefly introduce the panelists. So we will be joined today by Johannes Jütting, who is the executive head of Paris 21, and working globally on strengthening the official statistics system across the world. Then we have Oliver Weiss, who is the former Chief Data Officer and acting Undersecretary of Economic Affairs at the US Department of Commerce. And the US Department of Commerce is the largest data agency within the US. And so eager to hear from Oliver how this fourth wave also plays out within government and within open data. And then, of course, we are also joined, as Amandeep also was referring to already, by Ambassador Philip Thigo, who is a special envoy on technology for the President of the Republic of Kenya. Thanks so much for joining, and perhaps we can go into panel mode here and have more of a conversational engagement. But let me get started with Phil, and if I may. And so you've been working for the last many years, because I think the first time when we actually engaged was around open data. And so eager to hear from you, Philip. How do you, anyway, I gave kind of the fourth wave kind of framing, but I'm eager to hear from you, Philip. What's your sense? What wave are we in? Have you seen any progress? Do you feel things are moving in the right direction? And of course, given your leadership and engagement at the AI Commission, also eager to hear how does open data feature within that environment. So there we go. Over to you, Phil.
Thanks so much,
Sure.
Stefan, and
Small amount
thank you
of
for
questions.
inviting us. We'll be fine. I think we've been at this on this dance for the last 15 years. So it tells you how long we've been trying to get this conversation open data up and running. So I think if you talk about the first, second, and third wave, and I like how your slides captured it, but also it speaks to the same conversation we've been having on the first, second, third, and fourth industrial revolution, that you have many people who are rushing towards the fourth industrial revolution or the fourth wave, yet a majority of the world is still trying to grapple with the first wave. And I think that is something that we flagged even in the high-level advisory body when we talked about these commons, right? And data is one of the very critical commons that, as much as we talk about data, we're not talking about data in the same stage. And so the conversation that, for example, that I'm very keen on and that I've been pushing in this country and largely in the global majority, the global south, is that as much as you're seeing the waves, we still have to invest in the entire data value chain, right? So where there's a first, second, and third wave, there's no shortcut, right? You sort of have to do the open data stuff. You still have to focus on the open government, which is the policy side. And that's where now you start to deal with the issues we are seeing in the fourth wave, which is very much around the issues Amandeep was mentioning and something we flagged on the HLab around unequal representation, right? And I'm sure Johannes will speak about this from the statistical point of view, because this idea of fractured access to data and infrastructure is a problem. We are seeing, as you said, in the global north, where there's sort of the data desert, as you call it, and then you're seeing new instances around synthetic data being introduced. While in the global majority, we're talking about data gaps, right? And populations and data that has not been digitized, right? So majority of our data has not been digitized. And so you see that particular challenge. And so I think to Amandeep's point, that's why we kept on talking about a global AI data framework. It has to be global, because that's where you get sort of equality, but then that has to be grounded on something. And the grounding is the principles we started from the first, second, and third, whether it's transparency, whether it's interoperability, especially across borders and across silos, whether it's inclusive representation, whether it's, so that you mitigate against bias and disproportionately harming marginalized groups. Unless you do that, then we'll see a problem. And so for us in the HLab, we kept on talking about these common standards, because that's how you get common standards on training AI data sets, so that you don't have biases, and then being very deliberate in terms of how you address bias in the data, especially around representation of groups. Issues around, for example, linguistic diversity, because that's what we see a big issue in the fourth wave, right? And not just linguistic diversity, but also cultural diversity, which will remain a challenge if we don't address it. But that's the end of the wave. We still have to deal with the transparency, the accountability, interoperability, which are first, second, and third wave issues.
Wonderful. And also I always, as a facilitator, I always forget to tell the audience that obviously the idea is that you also ask questions to the panelists, and that in a Zoom environment, we have this great function called Q&A. And so feel free to post questions in the Q&A, and I will try to address them throughout the panel, or we can even address them directly if one of the panelists feel compelled to do so. Thanks so much, Phil, for that. Now, as it relates to, I do want to come back also to something that Amandeep was saying, which was at the end, which is also, we do need also incentive structures for actually making sure that data is made available. And wonder how that plays out within the kind of the global majority. Because part of the challenge is also, of course, is that this is not cheap, right? And so the question is, anyway, how do we both provide for the kind of the financial support, but also then the kind of the incentives to actually make data accessible and available?
And so I think, and this is something, and it's very sad, Claire is not here. It's a conversation, for example, we've been having with the Global Partnership on Sustainable Development Data and the United Nations, where a study that we did together with Dalberg Insights made the economic case for data, because that's the biggest case, right? That for every $32 spent on data, for every $1 spent, you save $32. I don't think there's any other case that can be made like that, because if you do not spend money on data, then you spend $32 more. And so once you make that economic case, I think it becomes obvious for everybody. The second part, of course, is about the data value chain, right? If you're talking about modernization and digital transformation, it means we have to invest in the entire stack for data and in the entire data infrastructure. So whether it's internet connectivity, because as you know, if it's not digital and people can't access it, it becomes a problem. They should run compute that we are seeing around AI. It's something that we have to invest in. But also we know you have to use open data if you have to train AI. And of course, we are not saying that open data should not be within, rights and privacy, respecting environments. I think for us, those are things that we can't avoid. But also we look at the global majority, right? So data for a specific country within the context of AI will really not be much, right? If you're going to invest in very big infrastructure. And so then the incentive structure that we've been talking about in our context, especially in the global South, is if you've had this notion of AI factories, right? So the AI factories, for instance, cannot be everywhere. But to be able to compete in this AI economy, but also to be able to bring your economy into the AI or the age of intelligence, it means you have to co-invest. So it's not about one country investing on certain infrastructures, it's a collective investment case.
Right.
But also it means you have to invest across the stack, because data is just not about the data itself, it's the talent, how you collect the data, how you store the data, how you analyze and use it for decision making and action. And so that has been an interesting incentive structure, to the extent, for example, for the Africa case, we've been able to work with NVIDIA and Cassava Technologies, for example, to work on 5 AI factories in 5 countries, right? So Kenya, South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, and Morocco. And so that creates a unique ecosystem for these commons we are talking about, right? So sort of a continental data commons, where those who can invest in the big infrastructures can do it, but then it means everything else will be shared, whether it's the talent to be shared, whether it's the processing capacity to be shared, but also it's beginning to spur infrastructure collaboratives, especially intra-Africa connectivity, because we have a lot of cables landing on the coasts, but not much is happening internally. So that entire conversation, I think, for me, is a bigger incentive, which means countries now know where to invest very scarce resources and not necessarily do things that are not necessarily useful for them or will not be appropriate, right? Because as you know, AI consumes energy and a lot of these things which not many countries have.
Great. Cool, wonderful, and I might come back to some of that, Philip. But let me go. Yeah, this is excellent. Let me go to Oliver, and so Oliver. So one big mandate of the Department of Commerce, but also of many statistical agencies, because of course within the Department of Commerce you had census and so on, is of course to inform the public. And what we see happening now is that the public actually goes to Gen AI to become informed, and quite often gets results that are not based upon official data, right? And so one of the key questions was then, of course, that anyway, I remember, Oliver, that we started working on as well, is that why is it that Gen AI answers are not based upon official data? And then the key question was, is actually official data or open data AI ready? Meaning, are they actually ready to be used for instance, training or for augmenting as well? And that's something, Oliver, that you have been focused on. And so eager to hear your assessment, because that was kind of the question that we started with. Is actually open data AI ready, or is actually the official statistics AI ready? And so eager to hear from you, Oliver. Where are we on that journey, and what do we need to do?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Stefan, and thanks for hosting this important conversation. And good to see my fellow panelists. So yeah, I think your framing is right there, Stefan. What we want to enable is a user experience where a user of any data sophistication level can use free and widely available generative AI to get answers to their questions. And if the answers to their questions rely on public data, especially public statistical data, that those AI systems can reliably find the data that they can reliably develop the appropriate query strategy, and then go out and find the data that it needs in order to provide a response back to the user, and that those answers are accurate, have appropriate provenance, and are fit to purpose for the user's response. Like, that's what we want, right? And what we uncovered in our work, which is at least 2.5 years long now, is there's 3 strategies. One strategy is to tune or to train a GPT on the nuances and idiosyncrasies of public data. And there have been attempts to do that. There's Census GPT. There's NSF right now is building out a chatbot for US statistical data. I know different countries have experimented with this approach as well. And I think that that's an approach that we should continue to invest in and experiment with. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm not too sure if any of those will truly satisfy the user need, though, of just your 5th grade child going to the internet and wanting an answer to the question. They're going to have to find that specialized GPT, probably. The second approach, and it's the approach that we really delved into at the Department of Commerce, we set up a working group chaired by Sally Ann Keller, who's the chief scientist at the Census Bureau, and launched into a cross-sectoral engagement process. But how do we as data providers provide data in ways that are not just machine readable, which is the current standard for open data, but machine interpretable, so that we can maximize the probability that an AI can find and interpret our data? And we have a report on Conference's website, I'm sure we can put it in the link there, that lays out those suggested best practices for data stewardship and data publishing. And there's a lot of like basic data hygiene stuff in there, like stuff that isn't new to the data management community. The stuff that is new is really that we have to go beyond document level metadata. That is like, what is this data? When was it created? Who owns it? Those types of things. And those are the metadata that are contained in the DCAT v2 standard, which was the general standard for metadata publishing in like the the open data era, right? But we really have to invest in variable level metadata. So like, what are the columns in that data set, and what do those columns mean, and how do they interact with each other? So we recommend exposing those metadata to both humans and AI alike, adopting things like schema.org tagging, which is a common web vocabulary to facilitate both search and AI interaction with digital content, and also croissant, which is a machine learning metadata vocabulary. So those are those things. Then the other third major strategy, and the strategy is so new that it wasn't even contained in our report, was that so the first one, just to review, is focus on building out the GPTs. The second is focus on data management and meet the LLMs where they are. The third is build out MCPs, model context protocols, which is an innovation that Anthropic introduced to the market in November of last year. And that's quickly becoming the way content providers of all stripes on the internet expose metadata, or really instructions on how to interpret their data, to AI, and especially agentic AI. And this MCP concept has been really critical for Anthropic and other companies in this space, other innovators in this space, to deliver point solutions to users that can actually work well. Like they launched the MCP concept, and then also a solution for the financial services industry at the same time, which is basically like the natural language competitor to the terminals of Your that expose a lot of different financial data. And so this is a concept, MCPs, that I just left the Department of Commerce, but that my team was working on and experimenting on. And actually, I'm really proud of Bella Mendoza, who's an analyst with the US Digital Corps, and they're still there. But they worked with with the USA Spending team, which is at Treasury, which has very valuable open data, basically on all the spending, federal spending. And before the MCP, creating an MCP, if you use Claude or ChatGPT to try to get answers about federal government spending, it wouldn't work. You'd get a non-response because the AI couldn't really interact with that data. So to answer your original question, Stefan, no, that data was not AI ready. But you can, without actually changing the data, just as a supplement, write an MCP, expose that to an AI, or install it on your server, and that greatly enhances the viability and the reliability of the responses. And it works like magic. And that's a very promising innovation because it's not as resource as intensive as training entire new GPT, nor resources intensive as adjusting the data and metadata. It's like a nice in-between layer.
Great, wonderful. Thanks so much, Oliver, and thanks also for introducing MCP, which is interesting because I think both Amandeep and Phil were also referring to the need for new standards, and ultimately I think the MCP is kind of a new open standard that really makes a difference in the whole conversation about AI readiness, and how we can, especially for public officials, how we can start leveraging their data for Gen AI purposes. I have another question, but let me first go to Johannes, Oliver, and then loop back with all of us. And thanks, Johannes, for your patience. It's always kind of, anyway, hard, I guess, hearing others and then want to intervene. But so Johannes, in Paris 21 obviously focuses on capacity building within the statistical sector. And so from your perspective, in the current environment, right, where you both have new challenges, but also budget crunch quite often, what do statistical agencies need in order to meet the moment that we currently have?
Thank you very much. It's good to be in this panel. Thank you for associating Paris 21 to this important discussion about open data, its current state, and where do we see it going, and also in particular the link to AI and generative AI. I was happily seeing the setting of the context by Stefaan. So if I would answer your question with one word, one could easily say more resources. What national statistical offices are needed is more resources. But to be honest, that would be far too simple. That would be far too simple. And what I think is in this current changing environment, what statistical offices need is an appreciation and recognition of citizens, the need for quality data. There has to be an expressed demand by citizens for quality data. Now, let me take a step back here. And first of all, we are very quickly going always to the negative things. But I think, Stefaan, it's good to, from a statistical here, official statistical community side, to appreciate the summer. And just to give and to call out one report that has been produced by our colleagues of Open Data Watch. They do this since a couple of years. It's the Odin report that assesses now more than close to 200 countries in terms of their state of art in openness of data. And they have a certain methodology. It's all very well developed. And they speak about a decade for progress. And it's a decade of progress specifically in economic and environment data in terms of openness. And for me, we should appreciate this moment. It's like with success in development. We often don't appreciate enough that we have success in health, education, agriculture. Then for me, the question is, what are the drivers of this success? What has been useful for national statistical offices to get to that a better stage? And here I think, and Philip, we discussed this when we were in the conversation about big data and about setting up GPSTD and data revolution. We know the ingredients of capacity development of national statistical offices all over the world, which is to some extent, it's you can divide this maybe in 3 boxes. Capacity development, one is the personal, the individual capacity, skills development. Second is organizational in terms of providing financial resources, training opportunities, and so on and so forth to have those institutions doing a good job. And last but not least is the institutional environment, it's the governance. And here, Stefaan, I mean, you have been writing quite a lot about data governance and statistical governance. And I think here we can say that in many countries, we are working, in many countries, Paris 21 is working. There has been great success. And I think we know what the ingredients are. Now, the question also is why and what happens now? And I hear my biggest worry is that, and this is linked to your question to Oliver, if people now go to Gen AI all over the world, they wouldn't go to find official quality data, but they just go to Gen AI or Google and ask for the data. The key problem behind I see is not enough awareness, data literacy for many of our citizens that this quality data is an important resource for democracy, is an important resource for economic and social development. And I think we have to invest more time and energy, and statistical offices have to invest more time and energy to make their voices heard, to reach out to the citizens, to engage them, but also eventually, and we have the citizens-generated data movement and others, to have them part of the data production. So we can develop this later on a little bit further, but I think to answer your question, of course, many statistical offices, you know this very well, we have seen it. There are big budget cuts, both in rich and poor countries, There are sustained cut in aid and official development assistance for this. This is an important problem, but I think we also have to focus on this appreciation of citizens for quality trusted data. Without that, I'm very worried that people will not want to invest in this. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Johannes, and much appreciated to bring the citizens' role in the conversation, because quite often it's kind of seen as kind of, you know, you have the data community and then you have the citizens, but if they are not connected, exactly, it's too easy to basically dismiss the importance of high quality official data as well, and also important to reflect on indeed the financial constraints that currently exist within the ecosystem. Now, one way to deal with both, perhaps, Johannes, and I'm also bringing in both Oliver and Philip in this. One way is exactly as what Amandeep was referring to as well, is this notion of a data commons, where anyway, and this is kind of anyway a discussion that has been going on for a while, where there is need for high quality data, but how do we bring it together, right? How do we then bring it together in a way that is financially sustainable, right? So that it's not just anyway an investment and then only a few can have access to it, but also from a commons perspective, how does it also take the citizens' perspectives into account on how data is being made available and how it is it and for what purpose it is. And so eager to hear Oliver, Philip, and Johannes, how do you look at this data commons as kind of an extension of the open data kind of environment? And perhaps I know Oliver, you worked on that as well. So perhaps if you quickly can reflect on that to get started. And there are questions, by the way, in the Q&A, so I will make sure, or they're already answered as well, but Oliver.
Yeah. You know, I think data commons is a data governance model, right? And I think with the advent of AI or the introduction of AI, I think we're still figuring that out as a data community. Like, how do we do that? Like, one way, when we were talking to interested stakeholders through this process, they suggested that we participate in a data commons. At that point, that data commons was open source, but run by a prominent technology company. And that the best way and the fastest way to meet the user need is to participate and provide data to this data commons. And because it would be open source, that would be an efficient way to move forward with better data interoperability. Turns out that that company made a strategic pivot with that data commons, decided to go closed source because that was in the business interest of the steward of that commons, because they had to make it financially sustainable, and God bless them. So we made the choice that maybe we shouldn't provide it in the data commons. What we as government should care about is providing the highest quality API as we can with the best possible metadata, so that the various data intermediaries, whomever they will be, can leverage that data however they need to in order to provide data products that are fit to purpose for those users. And so we didn't go into a data commons, and I'm kind of glad we didn't, because I think a lot of those governance issues were evolving and premature. So Stefaan, I don't know if I just offer that as a word of caution.
Yeah.
But
No.
I don't want to throw cold water on the idea. I think there's probably lots of good opportunities and use cases for data commons, but let's proceed cautiously.
Great. Philip?
Oh, yeah. So I'd actually go the other way, right? And as I said,
That's
it
the
depends.
great thing about a panel where we have at least some
So-
discussion. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so it depends, right? So and I said it, for sort of advanced economies, you're sort of at a level where maybe you're beyond talking about data commons, right? But when you're talking to an ecosystem that is under-resourced, and requires a deliberate intervention to ensure that data is a common, right? It's something that folks need to access it and needs to be treated like a common resource. It becomes very different, especially for the developing world where government is supposed to be omnipotent. Is the largest mechanism that ensures equality of access to everything, and that everything includes data. And so I think for us, and that's what I'm saying, we've gone the other way to ensure that. How do we ensure that you provide this governance framework that ensures that you treat data as a common and shared resource? Otherwise, you have this very unequal sort of context where those who have will continue to have. And when I say data, it's just not the data itself, it's the entire value chain, right? Where there's the internet, the infrastructure. So you need somebody to step in and mediate. And this is the point where, for example, we failed a lot, to Stefan's point, that if the greatest provider of data that will ensure that data is produced in open standards and open formats for everybody to be able to leverage for decision making and action, even for entrepreneurs to create opportunities and businesses, is government, then we need to invest in government to be able to produce that data. And so that data becomes a common. And early stages, we used to say, listen, if governments did not invest in weather data, we probably will not be able to access those capabilities. If governments did not invest in geospatial data and Earth observations, we will not be able to access those. And we are still using those commons up to now, especially for countries like ours. We are still leveraging on Sentinel and Landsat for a lot of the geospatial data and Earth observations. Because if those commons were not there, we cannot access planet data, which is more 50 centimeters, right? So that's what I'm saying. We are going, at least for us, we still believe it's something we need to have sort of a shared stewardship, that no one actor owns these sort of high value data sets that have potentially high impact, especially for development, decision making, and outcomes.
Great. Johannes, let me go back to you and see whether you have any reactions to that, but also how do you see this discussion of AI and then data commons for AI play out within kind of the countries that you're working in?
Yes, thank you very much. On the data commons side, I think it's important we discuss on which level we're discussing here, data commons at national level, regional level, and local level. So where what I have seen and specifically linked to the Sustainable Development Goals and to the data sourcing and to all the discussions that have started through the SDGs at the local level, there has been quite, in lots of countries, particularly Kenya, where Paris 21 is also very active and has partnership with the statistical office, but also with civil society groups, is to have data commons at the local level, which is something really interesting to look at and to understand how they work and why they work. For me, the incentives, why would citizens spend time to share data and to engage? Why would they do this? They have other things to do, because sometimes we equate participation with something is good, but people are busy and they have other things eventually to do. They would do this if they see that this data that they provide will eventually change public services. It's all about education. So if I report back, teachers are not showing up in school. If I report back, healthcare is for free, but I have to do under the table payments. If I can report back the climate change sort of rain and I get better services by the extension service of the government, if I see this happening, if I see action, I will provide data and I will engage. So for me, the data commons idea is very interesting. The challenge is the scaling up. it's like a classical development challenge. We often have small projects, small things, but how do you scale them up at a meaningful level? And I think, Philip, you mentioned a couple of things related to data stewardship, to governance, and incentives. So that's the big question. I think, Stefan, that's something we would need to be sort of look out of very important successes at the local level. How can we scale them up? What are the successes, and how can we combine them eventually? The second part of your question was more about AI and the role in the global south. Interestingly enough, I think this is a very important question, which in our community, I feel is not enough discussed within the official statistical community. It's overall speaking, you might just say, from a very naive entry point, you say, the global north will benefit tremendously because they have already wonderful statistical systems, and the global south will be even further behind because we have a digital divide, and it will be even growing through AI in a very simplified way. But it's not at all the case. We see some countries which we put in the global south, so therefore also the term, as we know, is not perfect. But some, let's say, of the emerging economies like Kenya, Ghana, Rwanda, Philippines, Colombia are far ahead with using generative AI and also classical AI to produce and use data and statistics. Because they have been very open to the data revolution. They use open data. They have used satellite and big data sources. So that's happening very well. The critical question is for the poor countries. What can we do for the very poor, low-income countries with low capacities? And I think here the jury for me is still open. I think, Stefan, and I think in one of the presentation, the AI for data, data for AI. How can we, in those countries, I'm still convinced that we can use generative AI and AI also in a low capacity context. It can be the mobile phone. Look, what we thought about the mobile phone some 30 years ago in development, if you go back to those conversations, everybody was saying, the mobile phone is only for the rich. No, but it transformed lives basically of the poor people, of the poor farmers. The same can happen with Gen AI in a poor country context if the conditions, the right conditions are put in place. And I think here we need to see what could be the right conditions. And I'm very happy that Paris 21 has a very nice project with a couple of countries on the readiness for AI, where we assess those things. We also have a task team on this topic where we exactly look at those questions. And I think it's important not to forget those countries that are left behind and think about how we can use AI to bring them at least to the next level of development.
Great, thanks so much, and thanks for those insights, and Johannes, and also to bring in the local level, but also reflecting on how AI can provide value in different kind of contexts as well. I do, and Oliver, there is a question also, or there are a few questions for you in the chat as well, and I might come back to that as well. But one of the big, I would say, aspects of AI and open data is one, from my perspective, and there's actually a question there just being posed, is actually that quality data has become front and center, right? I mean, in the past, when we had open data, there was quality data was important, but it was not as kind of a topic as important as we currently discussed. The second element from my point of view, and also eager to hear from the three of you, is that turns out actually unstructured data has become more or equal, if not more important than structured data for AI. And open data is still very much about structured data. And so eager to hear from you, do we need a broader concept, what we mean by open data? And it goes also back to what Amandeep said, kind of a broader concept even of openness of what data, not just structured data. And how would that play out from your perspective? And also there are some questions, perhaps, why don't I go quickly through all of you to reflect on that question, but also if you want to address the question that is in the Q&A, Oliver, one is about, I would say, the FAIR principles and the American AI Action Plan. And then the other question is really about quality data which goes back to my reflection on the importance and the increased importance of quality data, which were mentioned, but also the increased importance of unstructured data from my point of view. I don't know, Phil, do you want to respond? And this is kind of the last round probably that we will have. So any other element that you want to add here, over to you.
No problem. And I think for me, it's again the challenge of this age of intelligence, right? And you've mentioned this kind of fourth wave. The fourth wave is still, I think it's to be very clear that the fourth wave is not new. It's building upon the first, second, and third.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the point that Amandeep was raising, and the point that we were sort of kind of obsessing with in the high level advisory body, was the need for this common, right? So this global AI data framework, which needs to build on top of what we are seeing as emerging, right? If unstructured data is what seems to be I don't want to say as Amandeep, the oil, the land, or whatever fuels the land in this new AI sort of world, then we need to also evolve the frameworks. And so that how do we evolve and standardize? Because you can still have unstructured data, but it can still be standardized. Because the data has to be ingested, it has to be, with inferencing and training, it has to be in a certain standard. And so I think for me, it could be interesting, for example, for the statistical community, to sort of start thinking about this, because you guys are very good at this, right? How do we begin to think of these common standards and a common framework? If you look at what has been happening in those big sort of infrastructures that are coming out of the Global Digital Compact, this is one of the things that fell out in the cracks. So I see this as an opportunity for this data community potentially to build out. The second part that, and I know Amandeep has been working on this with the Secretary General, is this capacity building framework. Because part of beyond a global AI data framework is also a capacity building framework. Because you sort of want to build people's capacity into understanding this kind of world we are going into that now sort of has prioritized or seems to value more than structured data. But that unstructured data at some point must be able to drive decision-making and action, and must be able to make sense for everyone, including the folks Johannes is talking about, citizens at the local level, so that they see the value of that data. Yep.
Great, excellent. Oliver, you're muted.
The idea of unstructured data, yeah, absolutely. I think for CDOs everywhere, not just in the public sector, but in all organizations, the domain, part of your role is prepare your organization's data so that you can use AI effectively. The unstructured data, that's how LLMs work, right? Like the problems that we're having with AI interaction with public statistical data is because the public statistical data is structured and not unstructured. So you either make that data more interpretable to the AI by surfacing a whole lot of metadata, either in the data or through the MCPs, or another approach that I know some people are playing with is just literally to convert a structured statistical table into a whole bunch of sentences, because that sentences and that text is a whole lot more interpretable to LLMs. So yeah, I think that's a real sea change in how chief data officers think, and we think of data stewardship. There is a question on the FAIR digital objects. I'm just not as familiar with that project. Would love to learn more, and maybe I can follow up with that questioner who asked that about that specific initiative. And then there was a question about the AI action plan. Yeah, Frank, and I'll say this now because I'm no longer under the employ of the federal government. But I think the AI action plan, with all due respect to Director Kratsios and the team there at OSTP, whom I have a great deal of respect for, I think the data got short shrift in that plan, and there was a lot more that could have been said and called out for in terms of preparing America's public data for the AI era.
Great, thanks so much, Oliver. Johannes, you were the last in the row, but you also have the last word. Over to you.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to address that question about quality data. Is it on the rise or not? And I
Well,
think to be
yeah,
for
well,
me
it's
the jury
definitely
is
more central. Let's put it that way, probably.
yeah, or more central or not. I mean, I think the jury is still out. For me, it's
Right.
not yet decided where the train will go. I was just looking at recently at a couple of Financial Times articles, right, which for the first time featured statistical offices. There was, of course, big articles about the latest development in the US Labor Statistical Office with all the things that happen there and will continue eventually happen in the US. There were also articles about the UK office, couple of times. And that wasn't putting official quality statistics in a very good light, I have to say. And for an ordinary layman reading those articles, they would probably have said, "Oh my God, what's going on here? Do we need those offices? What is going on here, and how can we?" I think again, I come back to the point that it's. I mean, we know that, and another article. It's actually a letter by the chairperson of the Statistical Commission, which is Professor George Simon Ulrich, who is arguing for creating a trusted data observatory, which is a sort of metadata platform. It's a metadata platform where ordinary citizens would be directly directed, and you would get access to quality information, just to avoid this situation that we have discussed before. That the search engines would find quality data, and which of course currently is a problem. They don't. So this trusted data observatory is one way of addressing this. But as we all know, garbage in, garbage out, it's particularly important in the global south to lay the focus on quality data. Quality meaning many different things: unbiased, granular, beyond averages, and so on and so forth. Yes, that would be fantastic, but the question is, and I think we have to be much more outspoken, that this isn't to produce the quality data isn't cheap. It costs some money, it costs resources, it costs sort of, you need technical skills for this. And I think we need to be more vocal. The official statistical community needs to be more vocal that good quality data is important for democracies. It's important for the SDGs and for many other things. If that is not clear, I'm a little worried, to be very honest, that we are driven too much by the focusing on the big companies and some of those conversations that are pushed here. And those sort of more technical sideline conversations are not getting the attention it deserves. Now, I'm just observing. But I'm an optimist, so we will get there. We had a nice summer. Let's hope we will have a late summer and the winter is not coming too early.
So yes, exactly.
And stay on this optimistic side, and we can push the winter back as far as we can. Thank you.
Great. Well, that's a wonderful observation, Johannes, to close this panel. I've learned a lot, as always, by just listening to all of you and to also hear the conversation and even the discussion amongst you, which is always super enlightening. So Phil, Oliver, Johannes, thanks so much for joining us. Perhaps next year, Johannes, we can call you all back to evaluate whether, anyway, we are actually still in the summer or closer to the fall. But this was super important, super interesting, and super enlightening. So thanks so much for making the time, and thanks so much for sharing your wisdom in today's session as well. So with that, let's go to the next panel, which I'm delighted will be moderated by someone else beyond myself, because I think people would quickly get bored by seeing this bearded person constantly asking questions and making remarks. But I will be joined by John Wilbanks. I hope, John, you're here and that you can hear us.
I am here. My video is disabled somewhere remotely, so
Oh dear.
otherwise I'm here.
All right. Okay. So, well, it will be John without video. But John has been working on open data and been working in the data space for quite a long time, both in positions at Creative Commons, but also in positions at BioSage Networks, and more recently in another kind of position where you created actually data in Astera, where you created data collaboratives as well. And so I give you the floor, John, to introduce the panel and to also ask the questions from now onwards. Over to you, John.
It's lovely to meet everybody. So we've got our bios available, so I won't read the bios of our folks to you because we have a pretty short amount of time. But we have Claire Foulquier-Gazagnes, member of the board at Current AI, Michele Jawando from the Omidyar network, Venkatesh Hariharan, India representative from the Open Invention network, and Jeremy Rollison, head of EU policy at Microsoft. And so very happy to be here with all of you. I'm going to get started by noting that last year's panel really discussed bridging the data divide, AI tools for making data easier to consume, emerging models of data collaboration like data commons and marketplaces. And this year we're going to be looking at, and of course, a lot of stuff has happened in that space over the last year. But this year, what we're going to focus on is exploring incentives for data collaboration, sustaining efforts to combine open data and AI, and protecting global access to open data. And so, Claire, the first question will go to you, which is drawing on your experiences working in France's Chief Data Officer team and your recent work at Current AI. What do you think is the role of data in assuring public interest AI and evolution of the open data space?
Thank you so much, John, and really happy to join all of you. I'm really pleased to be there because, as you mentioned, this is very much a moment where I'm closing one loop of my career. 10 years ago, I was working in the French government's open data team, and today, and I was working and negotiating to release a lot of open data sets. And today, I'm working on building Current AI, which is an initiative that was announced at the Paris AI Action Summit that has raised a lot of money, so over $400 million, to put AI in the service of public interest, but specifically by focusing on financing the building block of AI. And one of those building blocks is data. So yeah, this is really coming full circle for me. So happy to be there. So to answer, yeah, you wanted to call someone?
Go ahead. I was going to ask you a follow-up, but go ahead.
I'm torn now, but I was going to answer the question you asked, and yeah, maybe let's. But yeah, feel free to jump in anytime. So coming back to your question, the role of data for me is not just important; it's truly foundational, in the sense that I'm sure that without high quality and diverse data, we cannot have public interest AI. This simply does not exist. And I will give you one example of this, which is the work that was like last year in the news around this time. The chemistry Nobel Prize was awarded to AlphaFold to predict the protein structure. But what was less talked about is how this work came to be. And this work was only possible because since the 70s, the Worldwide Protein Data Bank was being maintained under a no rights reserve license. And under this license, more than 200K protein structure in 3D were collected, harvested, checked to create this amazing high quality data set. And because of this, then protein structure prediction was able to happen. And we had that scientific breakthrough, but it all started with that data set. And that's also our theory of change at Current AI, that we need the creation of more of these high quality and diverse data sets that will then make truly artificial intelligence in the service of public interest. I believe in your question, there was also a second part on where I see the evolution of the open data sets. And from my vantage point, so looking at these 10 years that have passed, I see 3 changes, 2 that make me optimistic and 1 less so. So in terms of the changes I've seen, the first one is that we have moved from a single focus on open government data to a broader definition of public interest data. I feel 10 years ago, when you were saying open data, it was very much a synonym of open government data. And the topic itself was super niche. So when you were saying you were working on open data, everyone was looking at you like a huge geek. And what has happened in these 10 years is on the open government data side, I do believe we had quite a lot of progress. And I remember fondly like the race to the top that was at least happening in Europe between a country like France and the UK to know who was going to take over the open data index. So who was going to release the best and highest quality data between these two governments. Today, the situation has, we have seen a backlash happening in the US, but some governments are still pushing towards this. On the public interest data side, data overall has become more democratized, and I would say, in my opinion, that data literacy has improved. What makes me hopeful today is that when I see a community of patients, like working together, especially when we are talking about disease like long COVID or rare disease, working together to pull together data sets about their condition. And this was not happening 10 years ago. I also see initiatives like the Open Food Facts, stepping in where you don't have like good government data to build data sets and nutrition data. The second thing I see, and I will be quick, is, and this makes me hopeful, I feel 10 years ago, the open data and open source community were each evolving in their own corner. And today, what you see on a platform like Hugging Face is that these communities are coming together. You have data sets being published, and you have open source LLM creator using them. And one good example of this, in my opinion, is Common Corpus that has been developed by Playas using data in the public domain to help train open source LLMs. So that's something pretty interesting. I also see interesting example of this in linguistic diversity, but happy to share those after. However, I will maybe finish with one negative point, but yeah, you wanted to.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll go on to Michele next. Finish your thought, and we'll come back and panel to my question.
Yeah, the last maybe what makes me less optimistic today is that I feel we have a lot of easy reason not to open up data. When I was working in the French government, it was really tough to open data because you didn't really know what people were going to do with that data. And today, the issue is a bit different. You have this fear that if you open data, it's going to get scrapped because of how GenAI was created. And I think this is creating fears and a discourse that makes it harder for open data advocates to publish. So I worry a bit about this discourse and this narrative. And I will stop there. Happy to answer question later.
That's great. Thank you, Claire. And I'll come. I have like 5 questions, but I want to make sure we get everyone a chance to talk before we go to panel. So Michele, like when Claire mentioned AlphaFold and PDB, you've been at the Omidyar network. Your work focuses on improving the impact of technologies for society, right? That AlphaFold data is fair data, right? And it's relatively easy because it's protein structure data. It doesn't have privacy needs. It's hard to hurt the proteins. Can you talk a little bit about, given your legal and policy expertise, what kind of coalition building would improve policy development for fair access for AI, while recognizing that not all data is as easy to work with as protein structures?
So first off, I want to say thank you so much to Stefaan and the entire GovLab team. And I want to apologize to Jeremy because I think both Claire, Venkatesh, and myself were all former Googlers, and you're the Microsoft guys. So I don't know what's happening. Stefaan has to work on diversity of perspectives here. But seriously, one of the reasons why I'm so excited that we're having this conversation today is that I think it's essential because we're talking about something that's often overlooked, which is there's this profound interconnection between AI and data. And it's not just a question of AI for data or data for AI, but it's understanding how these forces work together and how openness really unlocks that potential. And I so appreciated Amandeep earlier in his comments that actually we have to get better on language around openness because of some of the fuzziness around the term. And so at ON, we're really thinking about this every day, how we look at how AI can collect and analyze and share data. It makes it more accessible, more useful, more actionable. You gave the AlphaFold example, but at the same time, we recognize open data is actually the lifeblood that makes those systems possible, that it makes them more capable, more fair, and hopefully more representative of this kind of diverse world. But we know that none of this actually happens by accident. And so to your question, intentional development of the type of coalitions that are represented here, private sector, government, civil society, academia, those require intentional choices about how you build and how you think about openness. And so we've done a lot of work at ON and investing in over 100 organizations who are working at this intersection that are looking at responsible technology. We're partnering with the private sector, Foulquier AI, really looking on how do we develop and create open license data sets that really benefit everyone. And I think when you step back and you say, well, what are the things that we want to get from coalition building? Because we all know it's a hard skill, right? It's something that we have to develop. But it's going to improve the policy landscape, stakeholder alignment, legitimacy, and you get obvious buy-in. And what often happens, and I think so many of us have been at these conferences, we all show up and we have our different perspectives, but there's no buy-in across coalitions or perspectives. You often see missing the kind of technical expertise and integration. So I was trained as a legal theorist, but I spent a good chunk of my professional career right next to engineers. And what often happens is there is a missed opportunity for shared domain knowledge. And so unless we can get serious about that, you miss opportunities on metadata standards and API protocols and data format specifications that actually make these data sets real for people, findable and interoperable, and actually lead to the type of changes that we want to see in civil society. We all say we want this to work in service of the public interest, but there's intentional choices there. And so I think as a whole, this gives us the opportunity for more pooling, more resources, and ultimately better implementation capacity. So you get to see shared funding, pilot programs happening in real time, and that makes for a better, more inclusive system of openness for everyone.
And Michele, given the portfolio you've got, and especially the way that it's working out into some of the big frontier AI companies, right? What are you seeing in terms of emerging governance models or frameworks that are useful for open data and AI?
Well, I think it's actually a really exciting time. I think 20 years ago, you didn't have the public consciousness about the need for conversations about guardrails and standards and shared governance. And so you're actually seeing companies like Jeremy's Microsoft and Anthropic and OpenAI who are doing a few different things. So you're seeing cascading review systems, technical boards, ethics committees, external advisors, and greater executive accountability. I think one of the things we want to see more risk-based classification to kind of streamline low impact applications and looking at higher extensive review for high stakes deployment. At the end of the day, what we're really asking and what we're really saying is we're having a massive social experiment that is occurring in real time. And we have to ask, what does it mean for that type of deployment? So I'm excited because we're seeing more formal partnerships. There's a lot more work that needs to be done there because what often happens is things are done to affected communities and not with them. And so we need real consequential advisory roles and co-design processes. And it can happen. We've seen it done. There are examples coming all out from public sector. And I think what's going to happen this time is this is not going to be led by governments. I think we're going to have to see the multi-stakeholder coalitions coming together. And I think civil society is going to play a really important role in pushing for this. And I think if we also look at industry consortia all moving in the same direction for these type of ethical standards and bias testing and data sharing protocols, what ends up happening is there's almost, I'll use the parlance of the young people, FOMO, right? All the companies who are doing the right thing are moving in the right direction, and we want to highlight that. We want to talk about that. And others who are not, they're missing out. And we want people to see the distinction between those two sides.
That's a great answer. I hear public interest technology underneath a lot of this, right? And I will note I'm married to a lawyer who works with engineers. It's one of my favorite patterns out there is policy and engineers in the same room.
That's right. We have a good time. It's a party.
That's right. And so Venkatesh and another ex-Googler, right? So you've written recently about the importance of national AI strategies, which include approaches to accessible and secure data. This is important to me. Not only am I married to a lawyer, I'm married to a Brazilian lawyer. So I spent a lot of time in Brazil. And so, in this moment, right, how do you recommend to a country with partial or limited AI capabilities, which is, I think, honestly, everyone has partial or limited AI capabilities? How do you recommend creating an open data strategy in this kind of world?
So I would classify the data problem into two sets. One is personal data, the other is non-personal data. In India, we now have a data protection law, and therefore, any personal data that has to be shared has to be driven by consent. So for that, we have built a very unique system, which is called the account aggregator. And in this account aggregator model, what happens is that data that is around the financial sector, so whether it's my banking data, my mutual funds, my insurance, my provident fund, etc., all that can be shared with third parties using a consent network. So let's say a bank wants to offer me a loan. They'll send me a request and I'll approve that request and then share my data with them, and then they run their algorithms and come back to me with an offer. And I could get an offer from, say, 3-4 different organizations. And so this is basically a system where AI is used at the back end using consented data flows to give loan offers and other financial services to individuals. I also advise a couple of open source AI projects in India. There is the Telugu LLM. Telugu is a language spoken by about 96 million people. There is the Tamil LLM project. That's again a language which is spoken by 80 million people. Now, the challenge in India, and I assume this is also true for many other countries, is that digital data in these languages is very, very limited. In Tamil, for example, it's estimated that you need about 15 trillion tokens to train a Tamil LLM. And the current level of data available is only about 20 billion tokens. And that set of data itself is very, very poor in quality because people type using the English keyboard. So they type in Tamil using the English keyboard. So what the digital data that you have is a hodgepodge. Some communities are trying to solve that in India by community-driven data collection methods. There is the Telugu group. What they have done is that they got about 45,000 volunteers to contribute about 1.5 million voice samples and use that to drive the automated speech recognition systems. I think in India, we will have to do more of these kind of curated high quality data collection drives. And thankfully, we have a huge population of students, etc., that can be harnessed. It's incredibly hard work, but it's possible to do that. The other issue which I want to mention is that, it's, this kind of effort can only be done by the government. I think, governments have to realize that this is a very critical point in time for their languages. If we do not invest in creating digital data sets that are open access, open source, these very languages might be at, threat of extinction. Tamil, for example, is a language that is 2,500 years old. There is a deep history of literature and culture in the Tamil language. and in many other Indian languages. But if we do not digitize the linguistic heritage of these languages, we will end up losing them at some point in time. So if we do not invest in creating data sets in these languages, I think, and it's only the government that can invest in creating these data sets as public goods, because no private party will say, I will create this and make it available. The other quick point I want to make is that there is also a concern that when community comes in and creates all these data sets and makes them available, the private sector should not end up being free riders on top of that. We are creating this data for the community, for the benefit of all of humanity. Therefore, we are thinking of things like share and share alike licenses, where the data sets will be available for open source LLMs to use, but if it is not an open source LLM, these data sets would not be usable. So I think these are the kind of I think the final point I'd make is that governments are the largest creator of data sets. So if those data sets are made cleanly available in a machine readable, AI usable format, I think that also is something that needs to be pushed very aggressively. So let me stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Venkatesh. There's so much to dig into that we're not going to even have time to. We're going to have like one question in group, so I apologize, but I want to make sure everyone gets a chance to speak. So Jeremy, I've worked with Microsoft. Microsoft's a global leader. Lots of companies follow Microsoft, right? Especially on open policy and research spaces. So, how do you at Microsoft think about the role of the private sector in advocating for these responsible open data frameworks?
Well, thank you for the question, and thanks again for the chance to be here, because this, during my day job, I'm looking at EU policy topics, many of which really overlap with this space. And I think some of the political stakeholders and some of the wider community that we work with are looking at this opportunity similarly, and it's certainly accelerated over the past several years. It's a space where I think there's a lot of like-minded views on where the opportunity is. And technology has done a lot to address even some of the reservations and maybe even some of the challenges that emerge in that space. So it's one of my favorite topics to address, and appreciate the chance to be able to be here. And much has been said a bit already, and I appreciate all my ex-Googlers' views. I work a lot with some of our competitors in this space still, because I do think there's opportunities for all of us to benefit. But I think Microsoft, at least in terms of where we've seen our role, this goes back to a campaign that I was privileged to be a part of all the way back in 2020 when we launched an open data campaign. And we've been advocating for more open data so that every organization can innovate and do more. This includes our customers, naturally, but also startups, open source developers, research communities, and all the organizations that we work with. Why it was exciting then is, when we think about so many of the digital technologies, and of course the importance of data, different type of conversations always come up. We've seen developers and researchers get really excited about what can be done with data. And what I used to say is there'd be all this excitement, and then the lawyers would get involved and things would often slow down. And there's legislative frameworks that implicate that and the like. But I think where we're excited is about not just the growing importance of data to the success of many of these initiatives, but where technology can also hopefully mitigate some of the reservations and some of the risks therein. So data is more important than ever, and I think our commitments to open data is more important than ever in an AI era, where vast and varied data sets are needed not just to minimize risk and bias, but to produce the most accurate outcomes. Varied data makes AI more inclusive of languages. That's been said already a bit here, and we've made some announcements in that space. But different institutions, different cultures, and of course context-specific data. You need that to maybe ground and fine-tune some of these models that are relevant to a specific task. We still, of course, hear concerns about privacy and security that would go to that example I mentioned with the lawyers and even some of our customers that hinder data sharing in that context. I think it's really easy to say, we need this data and there's big opportunity, but of course there are compliance considerations there and real risks around privacy and security. That goes a bit to what I was saying. I think technology has managed to hopefully advance a bit more, where we have some technological solutions now that can mitigate some of those risks. But nonetheless, it's important that we participate in dialogues like this on what responsible practices look like there. There are different solutions and different standards that motivate different sets of stakeholders. And we want to share the options that we think address these concerns through data governance frameworks or some of the privacy preserving techniques that I know many of our researchers and partners that we work with have helped develop. One example of this is, I think, more important than ever, and where our campaign has matured in that space, is really the important role of open data commons. So, these are pools of data that are managed by an organization or community in the public's interest. And we're more committed than ever to supporting the establishment of open data commons that provide that high quality context specific data for AI model training. And I think when we were talking about this in 2020, I don't think we were even aware just how quickly generative AI was around the corner and was making this realer than ever. So some of what we were doing in 2020, and we were looking at data analytics tools, and back then we talked a lot about big data and text and data mining. We weren't talking generative AI at the time, and I think things have accelerated tremendously there. So more important than ever, and I think we're remain committed, not just in the open data context, but these data commons that now become more important than ever when folks are talking about either scarcity of data or different levels of access to this data. We've called out big companies before. Big companies may be sitting on more data than smaller players who might even have better ideas. So we used to say that it's really unlikely that any one organization has enough data on their own to be successful at AI. But when you look at some smaller players in particular, they're even less in a position to have enough data on their own to be successful at AI, and particularly generative AI, when we're thinking about the vast data sets that are needed. So data sharing is going to be more important than ever, and it needs to be done in a way, as we mentioned, addresses those risks, addresses those reservations. And we want to commit to supporting more of the establishment of data commons that can go away towards, I think, addressing some of what I just mentioned. So we're collaborating with the GovLab in particular on a new commons challenge to support organizations that are developing community-driven and sustainable data commons for public interest purposes. Later this month, in fact, we're going to be sharing an open call to support nonprofits and research institutions that are working on solutions, including open data, particularly in the context of kind of my backyard, which is expanding the supply of digital content for low resource languages in Europe. Venkatesh, you had mentioned Tamil. If you look at all of the different languages and dialects in Europe, it's not just the 24 official languages, but regional languages in that context. And if you think about the way AI can help improve efficiency and transform things in a public sector context, well, the language tools need to be there and sufficiently there to actually make sure that this can be rolled out in those type of communities where those languages are present. And you mentioned some of the tokens earlier. I think we have some creative solutions that we're trying to drive and work with others so that we can do our part in sharing this rather than taking anything back from it. So I think really, if you remember two things, we want to emphasize that support for the data commons that can provide some of that high quality data for AI, and organizations that are globally cultivating data commons, community minded. These are things that we think are great and important to continue promoting and support. And again, I in the top of my mind, I'm thinking about some of our recent commitments that we've announced and what we're doing in that linguistic space in particular, to make sure that that cultural diversity, particularly here in Europe, but it can be applicable globally, that our role in supporting those institutions that want to make low resource linguistic and cultural data more open and accessible under their terms. I'm involved in this space on a daily basis in terms of all of the excitement around AI and all of the great ideas, but data is important, and where can that be made available in ways that are most accessible for some of these uses and the players that are involved in that. It's not always the commercial interest. Governments have an interest in this. And it's just a fact that when you think about the data that's on the internet, it's overwhelmingly English. But in that linguistic context in particular, we think there's a lot of opportunity around the data commons concept. And that's something that hopefully you've seen in the commitments we've announced. Hopefully you see it in the actions that we're going to be taking and some of the announcements we plan to make moving forward.
So let's stay inside the linguistic, and I'm going to ask each of you a different question around that, right? So in the Q&A, Claire had a mention of hack francophonie. Michele mentioned the importance of doing things with communities, not to them. Venkatesh gave us a good example in Tamil of an actual linguistic asset. So I'd encourage each of you to sort of react here. Claire, I'd love to hear your take first on, right? this is a very pragmatic and real example of how do we use open data to fuel data-fueled AI? And then how do we balance the risks and the benefits of the open data with an actual community? And so Claire, I'll ask you to speak from Hack Francophonie and we can pull out from that. Michele, I want to have you dig in a little bit into what does it look like to actually work with a community? I come out of the rare disease world in many ways, and the joke there is warm handshake, cold bagel, no changes, right? And then Venkatesh, I would love to hear sort of, again, from your experience in India, like what do the communities there think it means to work with and not to? And then Jeremy, I'll let you sort of respond at the end of that. Then I have one question from the Q&A and then we'll wrap up. We have about 20 minutes to finish up our Q&A, so we've got some time. But Claire, why don't you go first?
Thank you, John. So yeah, Hack Francophonie was a project I helped create in the French government to bring together civil servants across the Francophone world together to train ourselves on open data. So that was the context then, and in today's world, we are seeing is beyond just training. We are seeing more and more coalition to make sure the right data set are created in multi languages. We are seeing super interesting example in Africa, in India, in Indonesia. I was also made aware recently of a similar example happening in Chile with GPT Latam. So we are seeing this hub being created where not only best practices are being shared, but more importantly, data sets are being created in a multilingual way. I wanted to maybe just make one point here. I think when we talk about linguistic diversity, we focus a lot about data creation and the need to create this data. But one of their needs, and that's coming back to my earlier point on the open data community needing to work together with the open source community, is that we are in need of tooling in the sense that today you do have some of this data available online, but you lack of scrapper and encoder to detect it. And this is, I'm focusing like these days on East African language. And we are having like communities and an organization locally are telling us the data exists. You have a lot of like government PDF in local languages, but this data is unable to be crawled because we are not able to detect that it's in this very language. So there is also not only a data question, but also a tooling, an open data tooling question. And it seems to resonate with some of you, so potentially you also heard the same thing.
Nice. Michele, so like everyone says work with, not do to. That sounds like something that's easy to say and hard to do. What does this look like in actual practice?
And I so appreciate you bringing this up because I think at its core, what we're really talking about is how do you improve public trust, both in open data and in data-fueled AI. And so I think that there are so many ways that we can do this. I always come as an eternal optimist because I think that's the only way you can be. So I think there are a few things. Practical steps, adopt data provenance and lineage requirements, right? So when you have comprehensive documentation of data from collection through AI model deployment, communities can see, they understand what the collection methodology was. Researchers who are from those communities can then speak and talk about what the model training processes have been and validate those procedures. I think we've had a number of conversations writ large as a society around algorithmic impact assessments, but I think what you want to see is there's some amount of pre-deployment bias and fairness testing. I think if communities feel like from the start, I am invisible in the data is biasing who I am and how I show up in a global context, then you're never going to build the public trust you need. So what does that mean? Ongoing monitoring and reporting requirements and independent third-party auditing. I think finally on an individual level, and this is going to be hard, but again, I'm going to be a lawyer today, that we have to talk about an enhanced rights framework. You need to have the right to explain automated decisions and how they affect individuals. You need real, meaningful opt-out mechanisms, and you need collective representation rights and remedy for affected communities. And finally, multi-stakeholder governance bodies. What does that look like? You have to have community representatives from affected populations. I love the example that both Venkatesh and Jeremy talked about of intentional design, co-design with affected communities. It does not, none of the work that all four of us do happens and happens well unless you have communities who are there. You have technical experts who are independent of the deploying organizations. I think, again, at the core of this, we want broad consumer societal adoption and understanding. And when you have independent voices who are saying this is the future, this is the direction, that's going to be great. Bringing in ethics and social science researchers, and then finally having advocates and civil liberties and NGOs who are stepping up and saying, this is the path, and we see that. And so when you have that engagement infrastructure, when you have the co-design process, when you have independent technical advisors, you're going to see a shift. And I think all of us societally want to see the types of shifts so people have confidence in data and the deployment of many of these AI models. I think right now we're at a place where people will either take fear as a pathway or we can design something else. And I think what we're really saying is let's all think about how you do that. And I think there are so many ways that we can do that together.
Well, and sometime, Michele, I would love to sit down and talk about how we make those multi-stakeholder bodies, right, have the teeth that they need. But I'm going to keep on going, but I loved your answer. Thank you. Venkatesh, so I'd just ask you to react to these and sort of using that TAML example and really think about, right, like, how is this data underrepresented? How do we secure access? And how do we then, as Michele noted, engage those communities as co-designers, as opposed to maybe thinking of them as users, right? Again, I come out of the medical space. When you talk about user-centered design in the medical space, it's sort of like, animal-centered hunting, right? It's not actually inclusive and friendly. It's, you're trying to sort of convert people. So what does that look like on the ground for you there?
So the work that the Telugu LLM folks did is very educative in this respect. Telugu, so any Indian state, every 20 kilometers, the dialect changes. Every 20 kilometers, the type of food you eat also changes. So every Indian state has massive diversity, even within a single linguistic formulation. And in India, basically, the states were formed on the basis of linguistics. So what we have done with this Telugu LLM work is that we have gone to different parts of Telangana, spoken to different communities, collected their, cultural heritage in terms of songs, recipes, etc., and fed that into the automated speech recognition systems and the LLMs that we are creating. And just small things which would be missed out by people who do not understand the culture is, for example, in one particular part of in a rural part of Telangana, if a person has sore throat, they would say that my throat feels like burning straw, because these are primarily agriculturalists. So how would a LLM recognize that unless that particular cultural construct is fed into it? So the other part of it is that on the ground, when we go and talk to people and say that this is why we are collecting the data and this is how we will be using the data, I think a lot of people are very happy to contribute and be volunteers. And 45,000 volunteers is, in a population of 98 million people, 45,000 volunteers is a small number. But I think our plan is that we want to go to much more larger number of people. Right now, we are training about 100,000 students in AI over a 2-month period. It's a program called the Summer of AI. And what we have done is that 20% of the time of these students is also dedicated to creating text and audio content which can be contributed back to the LLMs and the automated speech recognition systems. So I think this model needs to be replicated at a larger global level across India and across the globe. I'm also working with this team to also document and do a case study on how they have gone about collecting this data, because I think this has got really important lessons for people in other linguistic communities. So it's a long answer, but I hope I've covered some of what you've been asking for.
Thanks, Venkatesh. Well, and I think you point out, right, 45,000 people, this is likely to need to be led by government, right? And Joel in the Q&A asked some questions about digital public infrastructure and how that interplays and benefits society at large, not just for the private sector. So Jeremy, I was going to put you on the spot as our private sector rep. But I'm sort of curious, right? Because if the government is going to roll out digital public infrastructure, generally speaking, they do that in partnership with the private sector. Right. So how do we figure out the balance so that we can get these social benefits, but also Microsoft can keep its lights on and keep running, right? So what's that mixture of roles between digital public infrastructure, the private sector, and AI, and how do they play together?
Listen, it's a fantastic question, and I think we like to look at where there's some win-wins there. And if we maybe use that linguistic example as one area where I think we all can have some win-wins, where of course we are providing infrastructure for some of not only our government customers and the cooperation that you mentioned. We've made significant investments in that space, and we are providing that type of platform that allows developers and others to have some of that affordable access, we believe, to build on top of what we've built and use some of the tools that are available there. I mean, on our own cloud platform, I think we're hosting over 1,800 models now that can meet a variety of different purposes. I think your question gets a little bit more at that public cooperation, though. And if I look at the backyard here in the EU, there's a lot of talk around that at the moment. There's some political winds that are blowing in different directions there as well, and those are challenges that we have on a day-to-day. But I think at the core, it's making sure that those who have some of these goals have the control that they need over what they're trying to build. And I think if I want to come back just to some of the linguistic announcements that we've made, if you believe in the importance of this economic opportunity around AI as much as we do, we want to make sure that the development of this doesn't have those bad economic consequences where AI systems that might not be able to understand or respond in a particular region's language, that's going to limit access and opportunities there. It's going to limit some of that economic growth. So if we're excited about AI diffusion and the economic growth that that's going to drive, to make sure that's as balanced as possible, you are going to need to have that cultural diversity that we talked about. And when you're separating then maybe some of the commercial interests from where the public interests are, that public interest side is where you see the government's focused, which is why we have European partners and others that are looking into this space, devoting public monies to it, to make sure that that cultural or linguistic diversity is preserved. And that can be built and run on top of some of the infrastructure we're making available. But it's a great way of getting back to that data commons concept as well, where we think that's where you can kind of ensure that the data flows back to the communities, because those who establish the commons can actually be the ones establishing the governance framework that works for their community and their data. So if we're making some of our data sets and multilingual data that we get from GitHub and others available for reuse, of course, that's also going to have to be processed and built upon on particular infrastructure. But if you do this in that data commons concept that I was trying to emphasize earlier, that's a way that making sure those that are really most interested in the project and trying to drive the benefits for the communities that they represent have control over how the data is used. In other words, who has access to it, where is the monetization coming from or not. And so it'd be an opportunity just to double down on that data commons concept, I would say, to say we can do our part. And of course, we're a commercial body like any others, but this is a space where we want to make available what we can and what we've announced to partner to use these tools and make sure the governments that are trying to represent these communities have access to what they need. And I think the check on that is what I mentioned around the data commons, where you really make sure that those who are driving that get to not only benefit from it, but drive the governance framework that works for the use cases that we're talking about.
So we've got maybe 4 minutes left. So I'm going to ask each of you to do a wrap-up question and try to keep it to a minute so that we can stay as close to track as possible. And I'll go Jeremy, Venkatesh, Michele, Claire, and let Claire have the last word. But so we've talked a lot, we've danced a lot around trust today. So 5 years from now, we've achieved trust. What does it look like? Easy question.
Yeah, great. If I had to answer that in less than a minute, I would say that trust in 5 years would be a successful data commons initiative that is leveraging different pieces of infrastructure, bringing together different stakeholders across different borders with a degree of certainty and control around how that data has been used, and actually making sure that the initial goal, whether it was enhancing linguistic diversity or cultural diversity, those who've been managing the project not only feel comfortable that it's met its aims, but that the communities that are there see that and actually want to do it again. I think trust would be there when we can show some proof of concept here that has led to some of those outcomes we derived, and people now want to duplicate that and call for the establishment of more data commons, more initiatives to see more and more results. So calls for duplication and repeating some of what we're trying to launch would be a good way of confirming that trust.
I love that as a metric. Thank you. Venkatesh.
I used to be a journalist, and I see this glut of AI generated content, and I see people forwarding stuff to me and saying, hey, this person has spoken, Elon Musk has said great things about India. And then I go back to him and say, hey, this is not Elon Musk's actual voice. This is basically an AI generated Elon Musk. So so to me, trust would be something where there are, say, models like verified credentials where I can trace a particular content back to its source and identify who the creator is and be able to say that, okay, I trust this creator, I don't trust this creator. So I think that from a content perspective, that's what I would be looking at.
Okay, Michele, what does trust look like in 5 years?
Government and public data sets are as easy to use as commercial APIs. I think that there would be a renewed public confidence in kind of data-driven government services. And systems would have the kind of increased transparent documentation that we want to see of data sources, decision processes. And finally, I think more democratic participation. In the world that I envision, and I think we're all working to make that happen, citizens can understand and their data use, and they have meaningful voice in the decisions, and that regular reporting from Venkatesh in his old life shows that we're making meaningful, pragmatic changes, and people can see those concrete benefits. And so seamless access, restored trust, and democratic participation. Claire.
Yeah, I will be in line with the last part. To me, trust, it's all about the people. I think it's about people. It's about people. It's about lawyers working with engineers. It's about engineers working with community. So it's about not only breaking down silo around the data, but breaking down silo around the people. And to me, that what would help with this is also investment in data literacy to happen. So there is less a top-down approach from the engineers looking down at the user, but actually being able to have this conversation on an equal playing field thanks to a shared data literacy.
Claire, Michele, Venkatesh, Jeremy, thank you so much for your participation. I'm sorry that you can't see me. I'm smiling. I wanted to thank the GovLab for convening us today. As always, Stefaan and the team there do such a great job pulling together the most interesting people on the most interesting questions. To everyone who joined us online and participated, thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing what comes out of the GovLab after this. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, John, for being such a good moderator. Thank you so much.
Yes, you're wonderful. And we didn't even see you, so you're really good.
Exactly. Thanks
for
so
the best,
much,
Michele.
John.
That's for the best.
Well, I was thinking, John, we do gonna send around a picture of you to all the participants to make sure that they know who you are and that they don't believe you were an AI agent, but they actually are a real person that was moderating this. So thanks so much, John. Thanks for the participants. Thanks, Jeremy, Claire, Venkatesh, and Michele for wonderful interventions. The great thing about not moderating is that actually I can listen and really process what is said. And I think a lot of great wisdom was shared here as well. So thanks so much. And so with that, we've come to the end of this summit, and I think it has been a very intensive, very rich conversation. It also shows that open data remains a key topic, if not becomes more an important topic as we move into the so-called fourth wave of open data. And so what I would like to do in the remaining 5 minutes, because I think this has already been kind of a marathon session on a very rich topic, is to really try to highlight a few elements that I feel were important from this conversation, but also that perhaps might provide some structure in thinking about how to move forward, and that we might want to come back to that as well. And I don't know, Andrew, whether we can quickly get the slide here projected so that we can quickly bring this to an end as well. I don't know, Andrew. If not, I can basically go quickly through those clusters. And again, I'm not going to take too much time because I think everyone probably wants to process what was said. But from my point of view, next slide, please. There were kind of 4 issues that I feel is important that in different ways have been emphasized. The first one, I think, is really, as we are talking about open data, we are in a different environment. And I think Claire also referred to that anyway, 10 years ago, we had this notion of open data by default. Was a challenge. But now, indeed, there's a lot more concern that if you make it open, how will it actually be used? Will it be used as fodder for training? Will it be extractive? And so we really need to start thinking about reimagining openness. And it goes back to what Amandeep was saying at the beginning. How do we define openness in today's environment? And I think what we've heard is that openness is something that probably should be defined by the communities involved and should be co-designed in ways that creates shared benefit. And that's also I think what Jeremy was referring to in the context of data commons. And so that's kind of the first key element from my point of view that resonated with me. The other one was indeed that there are different levels of maturity and that we really need to start investing in kind of data readiness. That also means building new data sets with communities, as Venkatesh was referring to, but it also means new tools, as Claire was referring to. It's not because you have data that you actually can reuse it or that you even can discover where the data might reside. And so we need to also kind of really invest in this kind of new notion of data readiness and new notion of data maturity. And that is both an investment that needs to happen by government, but also what I heard strongly by the last panel, it's actually also an investment by the private sector, both civil society, philanthropy, and the industry. And the third element, of course, anyway, how I started off is that we actually do need to prevent the data winter. And there are positive signs. And again, I'm also always trying to be optimistic. But what we see is also increased enclosure. And I do also agree with Johannes that we should not forget that we actually have gone a far way and that we should celebrate where we are today. At the same time, typically I'm not pessimistic, but I'm also fearful that we actually may have more enclosure than before because of the fear of extraction, but also because a lot of the activities might not be what we call socially licensed. You might not have a social license beyond quite often consent to start reusing that data. And so the trust, if there is no social license, the trust is not there and data will not be made available, not shared, and it will also become much harder to then subsequently sustain, from my point of view, public interest AI or even the potential summer of AI in that context. And then lastly, and it goes back to what Jeremy was saying, is that when anyway, even Microsoft started the open data campaign, there was no understanding on what 5 years later might be determining the open data conditions. And I think as a community, we actually have to make sure that we future-proof our investments and our interventions, and that it's not fighting the last war. And so what we are trying to do also at GovLab is to really become more engaged in policy forecasting, technology forecasting as it relates to data, so that and it also relates to actually what Oliver was referring to, is that anyway, till November last year, we had never heard of MCP, and then suddenly a new standard comes along, and actually the whole notion of data readiness and AI readiness for data becomes kind of a different concept. And so we really need to, as a community, also be super vigilant on what's happening. And that also includes what's happening at the geopolitical space, because I think a lot of what we haven't really discussed today, but a lot of the geopolitical trends will impact open data. And we also need to be savvy enough and sophisticated to take this into account. So with that, I think let me close here and say a lot has been discussed. There's a lot of sense of optimism with regard to the role of AI, a sense of optimism that the communities are stepping up, and even philanthropies and the private sector and government see the need for investment. But we should also be cautious that what my sense was that 10 years ago, we were very optimistic about open data, that this would be anyway something that we could only improve, but we can also see very rapidly a backsliding if we are not keeping the momentum going, if we are not keeping the value of open data front and center, and also document that, as Johannes was saying, we also need to actually have citizens see that this is important. And so I hope that this summit was a way to raise the bar again with regard to open data, keep open data on the radar so that it doesn't fall and it becomes a side event while everyone is focusing on AI. But also I hope what we saw today was that there is a community willing to keep going, and I thank everyone for that commitment and everyone for being part of today's session. And as I said, I'd learned a ton, so I will try to process everything, and we will share all of this back also in kind of a dedicated blog that then people can read who were not able to attend, mainly because we had to cross so many time zones in today's sessions as well. Thanks everyone, and stay tuned. Thank you. Bye-bye.